Please welcome Mark Viso of Food for the Hungry and our esteemed panel.
All set?
All set?
I think so. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. I'm Mark Viso with Food for the Hungry, and for those of you who don't know us, for the past 50 years, we have been designing, developing, and delivering catalytic solutions that transform systems so that communities challenged by poverty, injustice, and marginalization have access to the agency and resources they need to be resilient and flourish. Today, I'm privileged to be joined by several of our partners working alongside Food for the Hungry in Latin America and Caribbean region to ensure long-term sustainable solutions to some of the greatest challenges people in that region are facing today, from climate change to equitable access to healthcare and education, economic volatility and livelihoods, clean water, hunger, and malnutrition. So I'm thrilled to be joined here on the stage by Dan Gutwein, Senior Director, Education from Intel. Intel is a Food for the Hungry neighbor in Phoenix, Arizona, where our headquarters is, and a tremendous partner in bringing the power of technology to solutions, not just with us at Food for the Hungry, but in many countries around the globe. We're also joined by Monica Ellis, CEO and founding member of the Global Environment and Technology Foundation. We've had a long-standing partnership with GETF and Coca-Cola around clean water in Bolivia, helping more than 1,100 families have access to safe, clean drinking water in their homes. And Dr. Rob Bertram, the Chief Scientist for the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security at USAID. Dr. Bertram is a renowned expert on biotechnology and food security and serves as the key advisor for Feed the Future, which is U.S. government's signature program approach to global food security and nutrition. Thank you for joining us here in Miami. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
So we got about 20 minutes together. We'll go through a couple of questions and see where the conversation takes us. So Rob, let me start with you, if I can. So much of the news these days, as we've all seen, is about the growing global food security crisis, but mostly centered around the Horn of Africa and the Middle East.
Right.
It takes a lot of attention. But there's also a food security crisis and challenges here in Latin America.
Exactly.
We see it every day in our programming where we work at Food for the Hungry. Can you give us a snapshot of that crisis here in our neighborhood and a bit about what USAID is doing to address it and maybe even your hopes?
Thanks, Mark. I'm delighted to be here and to speak to this point. You're right. So often the focus is elsewhere, but the last few years have been very difficult for poor people in Latin America. We've seen poverty increase by about 20%. We lost a decade worth of progress in poverty. Latin America is also, it's 45% of global food exports now, and it will be over 50% by 2028. But that belies, the reality belies that there are still many, many people, probably about 15% who are really in extreme poverty. So in Latin America, these people are being affected by high prices, inflation, right, but also climate change. And they tend to be disproportionately rural and poor. Also in the cities, there's certainly a problem as well. But so AID concentrates particularly in the areas where in this heterogeneous region, there is a concentration of poverty. So the dry corridor in Central America and the Andean areas where you have large rural populations. So that is where we focus our efforts, where the problem is.
And what are your hopes? What do you see happening? What do you think would maybe help?
So in Latin America, the problem is not that there's no food. The problem is that people can't afford it. So our focus is on trying to help people improve their livelihoods. And these are, as I said, these are disproportionately millions of smallholder farm families, very threatened by climate change, and not having an adequate way of making enough money to purchase food and to have the things that they want, the children going to school, health care, all these things. So they go together, but so our focus is to get in there and look for ways that we can improve their livelihoods and through new technologies, better information about weather, about pests and diseases. And we're also trying to fight some of the real threats. Maybe you've heard about coffee rust. And of course, this has been one of the things that's driven migration as well, especially from Central America.
Right.
So we have a stake with our neighbors. When we both do well, we all are better off. So that we are in there working to help equip these people with better information, better practices, better technologies to make them more climate resilient, more productive, and better able to really pursue economic opportunity in their own backyard.
Terrific. So we're seeing the interconnectedness of livelihoods with food security, even on migration.
Absolutely.
And that gets to even like water, clean water. I know that Monica, Coca-Cola, GETF, Food for the Hungry, have had a powerful public-private partnership in clean water in Bolivia. Can you tell us a bit more about how GETF likes to work with NGOs, local partners, local governments, local municipalities?
Yes, thank you for having me. I
Good to have
appreciate
you.
it. No,
Yeah,
and I
welcome.
love our partnership with Food for the Hungry. Our foundation has been focusing in about 80 countries and building partnerships for resilience, these public-private partnerships that really advance sustainability and resilience in Bolivia. Working with Food for the Hungry, this is no different. What we try to focus on first is that access to basic services. You look at the unit of the individual and what they need, and then also the unit of the community and how you build that up from the ground up, providing basic access to water, sanitation, hygiene, economic development. And so much of our programming too is really focused on the lens of women. What we've found is that when you invest in women, we find more lasting outcomes. Yesterday was International Women's Day. We celebrate that very fact. And so I think we know too that women reinvest 90% of their incomes back into their communities, so you get a multiplier effect. In our work with Food for the Hungry, what you're seeing is those elements of resilience focused on basic services. That was the essence of our project. And so we worked on enterprise development, clean water access, as you mentioned, you stole the thunder there, where we have gone in Arbieto where 29% of families had access to almost 100% with this partnership. And so it's really about finding aligned interests with corporates and governments and municipalities and working with great partners like you to bring resilient, lasting outcomes.
Terrific. So water is just one of the ways to get at resilience.
It's an enabler for all of it.
Right,
Absolutely.
right. And we know in our work, women really are the drivers of resilience in communities.
That's right.
So it's great that you're focusing on that.
That's right.
So Dan, Intel has been a dynamic driver of bringing technology to solve lots of problems. And we're so delighted to be partnering with you, and you guys lead another big partnership, help forge a big partnership. Let me ask you, Guatemala in particular has been an interest for Intel and for Food for the Hungry because we're both there in Guatemala. And as part of our education programming there, Intel has been very generous in sharing their technology, expertise, and equipment with learning labs that we have there. Can you tell a little bit about why Intel, this big corporation, is involved in this type of thing? What's your guys' motivation?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mark, and thanks for having us here today, too.
Great to have you.
Thrilled to be here on behalf of Intel. I'll start by just going back to our core purpose as a company, a private enterprise, and that is to create world-changing technology that impacts the lives of every person on the planet. So when you start with that audacious purpose, you can take that now down to local levels, like in Guatemala, where we are as well. But the reality is over the course of the past 5 decades plus in the kind of the oncoming technology world, we've left half the world behind. That's a statistic, right? That's a fact that half the world doesn't get online, they don't compute, they don't access the digital world every day. And so we take that seriously, and that's why we're involved in some of these things. And by the way, if you look at that challenging problem, we all have a problem with that from a multitude of reasons, right? It's information sharing, it's information flow. So they're not getting the right information, whether it's food security, whether it's climate, whether it's water, whatever the case happens to be. And I'll also argue that we're also not getting that intelligence from those community members either, because we're not able to listen to them. So we take it very seriously, and all of our employees take it seriously. And so we've been involved in Guatemala. You've done a great job with Food for the Hungry, working with our local Intel campus there in Arizona. We've got some of our employee groups involved in actually sponsoring children in Guatemala and then kind of taking the community on as their own.
Right.
And if you can figure out a way to do that where you take people, and remember this, like there's a lot of NGOs in this room, there's a lot of students in this room and listening online. You chose to work for an NGO for a reason, because you have a purpose. Just because we work in the private sector in the tech space doesn't mean we don't have a purpose and a reason too. And we want to be involved in that. And so, part of the challenge, as you just mentioned, when you think about working with the private sector and our partnership we've had together, is you found a way to unleash that purpose from our employees. And we have over 100,000 employees. We have a coalition with millions of employees involved that all want to go out and do great things, whether it's giving their times, their talents, their monies to it as well. And we've been able to partner with you in Guatemala. It's been a great partnership and hope one that will continue for a long time.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, I think it's wonderful whenever we can connect, people, there's power unlocked, that people contribute their gifts and their talents in different ways. We just got to create that enabling environment to do that, like the foundation is doing, and USAID is open to public-private partnerships. Let me shift a little bit. For those of us who have followed the conversations at the World Economic Forum in Davos a couple of months ago, the term polycrisis will be familiar. In fact, there's a session later today on polycrisis in Latin America. It really refers to this compounding global risks and crises, compounding, coming together dynamically in the context of eroding resilience, the inability to respond, plan when there's an adverse event. But this idea of resilience really, I think, is changing. It's not the same idea of resilience that we've all may have talked about a decade ago that was largely siloed and limited to food security or climate change, climate sector. Now it's really about looking across these sectors. As we've talked, multi-sector, this intersectionality of lots of things that have interdependence in terms of pressures on people who are suffering from poverty or marginalization, or even the answers. I'd love to hear how each of your organizations, the folks you work with, are approaching resilience and responding to this new focus, and how that might hold some opportunity. Let me start with you, Rob. You actually work in the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, so it's actually in your name, which is an encouragement to all of us who think resilience is really important. And the U.S. foreign assistance approach has really embraced resilience as something that's important to how it approaches some of these issues. What do you see as the best options for strengthening food security, nutrition, and resilience for the most vulnerable people in this region, in our neighbor in Latin America?
And those are integrally linked. And the way I like to think about it, Mark, is that we can do things that increase productive potential, right?
Right.
We can also do things that reduce risk. When we do those two things together, people invest. On farm, off farm, all the way through the food system. Now I want to pick up on the points that Monica and Dan mentioned because they're so critical for resilience. First of all, water, particularly in a climate-challenged world, is absolutely vital. The places where we see the greatest stress are in water-stressed areas, like the dry corridor. Also, the gender point is so critical. Women are suffering disproportionately compared to men. We have good data on this in Latin America as a result of what's been going on in terms of the COVID, conflict, and climate. And then the data and digital access is so critical. Think how empowering it is for a woman to be able to know what the price is in Tegucigalpa when she's on her farm 100 miles away. And that's just one example. There's all kinds of market making, of answers to issues, problems, diseases, pests can be gotten through the use of digital technology. So in terms of the biggest opportunities, we've done some recent analysis with USDA and the International Food Policy Research Institute, and there's two sweet spots for us to invest in. One is horticulture, fruits and vegetables. These are grown by smallholder farmers. People in urban centers want them. And of course, we all want all of us to eat more of them, right? For good health, better nutrition. So that's one. The second might surprise you, coffee. Coffee is very threatened by climate, and millions of smallholders depend on it. And so there are some things we can do to help make it rust resistant, for example, leveraging science and local partnerships at the national level and with some regional partners as well. And then finally, all the way to that last mile through civil society partners, farmer organizations, and the local private sector.
Yeah, financial inclusion, access to markets. Some of us may have panicked early this morning when they ran out of coffee out here, so coffee is indeed important. Monica, the foundation, the GETF Foundation, is really noted for being on the forefront of creating cross-cutting projects, multi-sectoral approaches, and as you mentioned, really around resilience and enabling. How are you seeing your work change?
Well, I think what we're seeing is just a more demand for our work, and just pivoting off what you said, if you're thinking about aligning interests, so we need to upweight even more the work we're doing with the private sector, and particularly those companies that have a global and local footprint, because they're sourcing, they're selling, they're manufacturing in these places that maybe have more fragile resilience, right? And so in doing that, we can help align interests, help them make the investments together with the national and local governments, and perhaps with our foreign assistance as well, and kind of really put the wind to everybody's back in that space. That's what I think we need to do. We already work with Cargill, Coca-Cola, Starbucks, a number of major sourcing and manufacturing and production. They're in virtually every community in the world, and so it's kind of showcasing the engagement that they can have, making it simple, making it easy to invest, and helping everybody see their aligned interests. That's kind of what I see our world changing, and just more demand for that. Also more programming through the lens of women, because we know that sustainability dollar invested goes so much further if we program that way.
Right. You know, it's a real challenge, and I think when you think of multi-sector, interdependence, resilience, it gets complicated real quick. So I like your focus on keeping it simple.
You have to keep it simple, and I feel like resilience and sustainability are kind of coming together and having a moment. So I'll be interested to see.
It needs to be. Dan, I know Intel is engaged in other tech companies in thinking about resilience, particularly across systems. What I love about what Intel is doing in this other group that you might talk about is really working at not just addressing the symptoms, but how can we change the dynamics, right? Which is what technology can do.
Sure.
So tell us a bit about that work and what you're seeing emerge.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mark. And I think when you think about resiliency, and I don't work for a bureau, I think that's a cool name, though. So maybe we can solve in the private sector. But when you think about resiliency and sustainability and just some of these global challenges that we have, something's very clear to all of us. And there's no one company, no matter how good you are, no matter how smart you are, no matter how many employees you have, no matter how much revenue you have, that can solve this problem. There's no one NGO that can solve these global problems. It's not a government issue that can solve all these problems. But working together, and putting our minds together, I think we can solve a lot of these. And so I get the privilege of working in the education sector, running the education sector for Intel. And we have a passion around just equitable access to education for these children. Because I think they can solve some of their own problems too, if they have the ability to do this, which is information. And so we've done some cool work technology-wise as far as how we redesign networks to make them affordable. We're doing ICT labs from the old days that are 30 to 50% less costly now, and easy to manage and easy to run. But then we kind of open source. We started this group that's now known as the N50 Project. Stands for the next 50% of the world that doesn't currently participate in the digital world. By the way, it's not because of access. Please don't tell me that we need to go connect the unconnected. I would argue there's not a spot on this planet, if you have the means to do so, you can't at least make a phone call. Right. People aren't participating, and sometimes it is due to cost. You're spot on right. But many times it's just due to the digital literacy, not knowing how to go do this, not knowing what applications that would enrich their lives as these local communities define that enrichment, that they would actually go pay for. So we established this thing called the N50 Project, and you can look it up at n50project.org. And we launched it in February of 2022, and we said, hey, are there other companies, other organizations that want to come together to go help some of these global problems when it comes to information and access? And in the last 13 months, we've had about 120 companies join this coalition, extremely big tech companies throughout. And the beauty of it is working together to go solve these problems. And we kind of a motto at the N50 Project where we say, you have to check your logo and your ego at the door, right? Because it doesn't matter who gets the credit. We need to solve the problems. And I think if we can come together like that, as private, public, NGO, and academics together, there's not a lot of problems we probably can't start tackling. And so, encourage anyone out there interested, join us, right? Every one of you brings something to the table, and we've got to start doing that together. And that's why it's been so great to work with you. I mean, understand this. I have no idea what the situation these communities are in, and I don't want to go out there and say, oh, here's my idea, take my technology, good luck, right?
Right.
But you do.
Yeah.
You're in the communities. You've been there for 20, 30 years. You are indigenous people in those communities that know those communities and what it's going to take to get them over that hump, and that's why it's so great to work with organizations like yours, Mark, and others in this room. So thank you.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Than's for that partnership.
Absolutely.
So at Food for the Hungry, we have one of our philosophies is we believe that every imaginable problem has a solution. And if they work together in partnership, our efforts will make a difference. Absolutely. And so thank you for being on this panel. This represents that philosophy coming to light. So thank you all, Rob, Dan, Monica, thank you for being with us today. Thank you all for being here.
Brilliant.
Great.